Welcome, awesome educators. You've heard from me too much today, so I'll keep my introduction short. But my name is Joe, and I'm super excited to share with you the author of Plastic Ahoy, which is one of the central books in our artificial intelligence and robotics curriculum. So as your students go through our robotics course, they will be reading chapters from this book and solving ocean plastic and sustainability themed challenges. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Patricia Newman, who's going to share with you her experience as being an author, some of her upcoming projects. And take it away, Patricia.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here. I was telling Joe and the other people from ASU that I hardly slept last night at all. I've written a number of books about environmental injustice, and basically this presentation is to talk a little bit about that, but also to sort of strip away some of the mystique of being an author, because it's really not as glamorous as it seems. But my environmental career, if you want to say that, began with Plastic Ahoy, the book around which this new wonderful ASU curriculum is built. And looking back on my various titles, I realized several important things about myself as an author, which I'll share with you. But as I was preparing this presentation, I couldn't help wondering, I wish I would have known these things going into my writing career. It would have made everything a whole lot easier. But, unfortunately, life doesn't work out that way. And, we kind of stumble along the best that we can. I'm going to share my screen here with you. Hopefully now you can see a slide that says Patricia Newman. Just give me a thumbs up if you see it. Great. Okay. So if you look closely, most of my books are about underdogs. A warming, acidified ocean that's unsustainably fished with melting sea ice and a mountain of plastic. Not your usual underdog, very untraditional, but still an underdog. Or my books are about endangered species like sea otter heroes, elephants, rhinos, black-footed ferrets, and even orangutans. There's even a book about a little Kenyan girl. It's fiction, but it's based on fact, about a girl who wants to go to school but can't. It's based on a real school in Kenya. Today, I'd like to give you a peek inside the science books in the order I wrote them to show you how I progressed as a writer and a researcher. And sometimes it seems as if I was operating with a seventh grade brain, which I'm sure you all know very well, but my only defense is I was overwhelmed. And on the flip side, it's that seventh grade brain in me that keeps me writing for middle grade readers. Plastic Ahoy was my very first environmental book. And as you may have already, maybe you've had a peek inside, you'll read about a team of trash detectives that sailed to the North Pacific, a group of 17 graduate students who were among the very first to explore the plastic problem in our ocean. You'll read about gyres and how plastic is accumulating in them because of rotating currents. And you'll also read about the kinds of tools that the scientists use, and through the ASU curriculum, see videos of them in action. I chose to feature 3 of the 17 scientists on the trip because of their different approaches to plastic. Miriam studied the rafting community, organisms that hitch rides on plastic. Darcy studied whether plastic pollution affects phytoplankton, the all-important grass of the sea, and the little organisms, plant organisms that make our nearly 50% of the oxygen that we breathe, no matter where we live. And Chelsea, who studied the chemistry of plastic. Plus, I really liked the idea of featuring 3 women in science. Throughout the book, you'll be astounded by the amount of plastic floating in our ocean and the damage that it's doing. Hopefully, your students will be able to provide some solutions through ASU's curriculum. As Miriam says at the end of the book, people want to know that there are wildernesses out there somewhere. If even the open sea is no longer a wilderness, what is? So I'm going to stop sharing there and just move on without slides for a little bit. When I first had the idea to write Plastic Ahoy, I'd been writing fictional picture books, but they were based on fact. I'd never written a middle grade nonfiction book before. I didn't mind admitting that I was a mess. I probably rivaled some of your students. I had a folder stuffed to the gills. I've got it right here to show you, newspaper articles, magazine articles, scientific studies, notes from interviews with scientists, articles that I printed from the web, all this kinds of stuff. And I'm ashamed to admit that even to this day, there is absolutely no order to this pile of mess right here. And then while I was accumulating all of this stuff, Annie Crawley, the photographer, who you hopefully will meet sometime during this course, shared a Dropbox full of photos with me, thousands of them, thousands. I'm usually an organized person, but I hadn't figured out at this point how to keep track of audio files, printed files, website bookmarks, and all the other details that came my way while writing this book. Information came from every imaginable portal. And that doesn't even count how I had to try to figure out how to explain the chemistry of plastic to students, or how a scientist uses a transect, little scientific concepts like that. I also had to figure out how to write a proposal, an overview of the book with a chapter outline to submit to an editor. You may not know this, but most longer nonfiction books are sold on proposal rather than writing the entire manuscript. So I used mentor texts to help me. One of the ones I used was called Gorilla Doctors by Pamela S. Turner, Saving Endangered Great Apes. So I studied this book minutely. I looked at the number of words that she has. I looked at how many chapters she had. I looked at how many photos per chapter she had. I looked at what the captions were like. I looked at what she put in the back matter. And luckily, Pam is a friend of mine. So then I emailed her tons of questions. I also had to review how to create a bibliography. Now, I don't know about you, but I didn't have any cause to create a bibliography since college. So I dug out, rather than opening another online tab, I dug out 13 Steps to Research. This is a well-loved book that I used in high school. My high school English teacher published this book in 1900, and I have used it for every single book since. You can see how well loved it is. I've even included some online information that I printed out to update the way some of the things are recorded. So all of this stuff went into Plastic Ahoy. You'll be happy to learn that I was much more organized when I began Sea Otter Heroes. I purchased a nifty digital recorder, this little thing, not very expensive, worth every single penny. Sound is great, easy to hold. And when I was interviewing Dr. Brent Hughes for Sea Otter Heroes, I was on a boat most of the time. So this was key. I also figured out a note-taking strategy. Have you guys ever heard of these things? Notebooks? I'm surprised it took me so long to figure out to put my notes in a notebook, right? It worked great. I have one notebook. Every single book I start a new notebook. So everything is separated, and I still do that. I've also developed a color coding scheme for when I'm actually ready to write that I'll share with you a bit later. I have a slide for my most recent book that shows it up close. And I also had a plan for saving websites, articles, and all that other ephemera. Think digitizing and saving to the cloud. And I knew how to write a proposal. So we were in business. I'm going to share a few pages of Sea Otter Heroes with you. Let's see, let's move on to the next slide. My little my little video pane is in the way of my slide advancer. There we go. Written as a mystery, Sea Otter Heroes begins with, of course, sea otters, then seagrass, and marine biologist Dr. Brent Hughes. It takes place in the Elkhorn Slough off Monterey Bay in California. The slough is the most nutrient polluted estuary on the planet, according to Brent, because of all the agricultural runoff from the Salinas Valley, what we fondly call America's salad bowl. According to everything Brent had learned as an undergraduate and a graduate student, The seagrass in Elkhorn Slough should be covered with algae and nearly dead because of the excess fertilizer. But instead, the seagrass was healthy and lush and green. Why? A possible answer came from a tour boat captain who'd been logging sightings of a variety of slough wildlife for more than 20 years. When Brent graphed the captain's sea otter data, he noticed a steady increase in the sea otter population. At first, Brent scoffed at the idea of an apex predator determining the success or failure of a food web, but then he took a closer look. He performed scientific experiments, which are explained in detail in Sea Otter Heroes, one in the lab with mesocosms or habitats in buckets, and the other in the field. Brent discovered a previously unknown trophic cascade involving sea otters, a relationship where the apex predator in the Elkhorn Slough saved seagrass at the very bottom of the food web. Maybe you've heard of the wolves in Yellowstone. It's the same kind of relationship. Right before my Seibert Honor acceptance speech for Sea Otter Heroes, I read an article in Scientific American that said, educating global citizens is one of the most important charges to teach our students, important charges for universities. And the best way we can transcend ideology is to teach our students, regardless of their majors, to think like scientists. I immediately thought, why stop there? We should teach all kids to think like scientists, regardless of their age. Because in science, we need proof to draw conclusions. We find proof by asking questions, developing models, engineering investigations, interpreting data, running stats, engaging in civil discourse with peers about their ideas, and asking more questions. In the end, we either confirm our thinking or change our minds when confronted with contrary evidence, just as Brent Hughes did in Sea Otter Heroes. And I realized that I'd been unconsciously pushing this connection between STEM and the liberal arts and language arts for a very long time. It all began when I was a high school math teacher. Here's my faculty photo. I was right out of college. I taught remedial math at the high school level. So you can imagine the sort of skills that my students had. I introduced my remedial students to word problems because I knew reading was an issue for them. And one boy named Mark said, he raised his hand and he said, Ms. Newman, what is all this reading expletive? This is math class. Research shows that content-rich nonfiction books like Plastic Ahoy provide a compelling context for teaching reading and writing as well. By advocating STEM thinking in all subjects, we build skills that promote critical thinking, civil discourse, and literacy. And as you progress through ASU's curriculum, I know you will find that your students get involved. No one will sit on the sidelines. They will play to their strengths as they solve a variety of problems while developing their creativity and building social skills. They'll apply learning to daily life. What could be more applicable than plastic floating in our ocean at this stage of our society? It'll build motivation and self-confidence. It would help them develop critical thinking skills. And most of all, it builds grit, that very concept, that essence that you need to be a successful human being. I love this list because many of these skills overlap the skills necessary for success in reading. In fact, environmental education itself provides a huge list of benefits. I've compiled the findings from some of the EnviroEd research and found that getting to know our planet provides gains across curriculum areas, ignites a passion for learning, encourages eco-friendly behavior, improves 21st century skills like critical thinking and communication, and increases civic engagement. You can download this infographic on my website if you want. Another aspect of reading that most of us don't think about is reading photos in nonfiction books. And here's where I'm going to ask for audience participation. As students read, they come across photos like this one on the last page of Plastic Ahoy. chances are students will need skills to uncover the meaning behind these photos. And I found this activity at a California Library conference. Educator Noah Daniel was talking about her Friday photo activity. And it is fantastic practice for reading photos in nonfiction works. You can do this activity in person, on a smartboard, or virtually using a virtual whiteboard. Ideally, you will use different color markers for each of the 4 sections or different color sticky notes. But first, whatever you do, make sure you cover up the caption so the students aren't influenced in any way, if there is a caption. So here's step 1. Get ready to answer in the chat. Describe this photo. What do you see? Just stick to the facts. Colors, time of day, the people, the landscape, shapes, textures. Maybe Joe or Robin or somebody can read the chat for me.
You see lots of water, a boat on a beautiful day on the water, plastic bottle in the ocean, blue. Lots of people are seeing the color blue.
Blue, yes.
Partly cloudy. There's a ship.
Okay.
Waves,
excellent.
blue, white bottle.
You got the idea. Step 2. Now analyze this photo. Start asking questions about this photo. What draws your eye immediately? What question can you make about that? What's going on in the foreground, the background, or the middle ground? Are there any recognizable landmarks? What's the overall mood or feeling of this photo? Start asking your own questions about this photo. How do you react to it? The bottle draws your eye immediately. I finally found the chat, Joe, thanks. Why is there a plastic bottle floating? What is the ship doing? How is the rest of the water so clean? Actually, what you learn in Plastic Ahoy is even though you can't see it, there's thousands of little tiny plastic pieces floating in that water. Where did the bottle come from? Annoyance, yes, exactly, absolutely. So you can see how you would write these questions in, or write these sections in different colors on a smartboard, or use different color sticky notes, maybe on a virtual whiteboard, to keep track of what's description and what's analysis. Part 3 is interpret this picture. Use your questions and your description to start inferring what is happening in the photograph. What do you think is happening here? Ooh, I like that. Are the ship and bottle related for the last section, the analysis? That's a good one. What can you infer from this photo? You type some, oh, researching the same questions we are asking. That could be right, Joe. And the very last step in this learning how to read photos is evaluating everything that you've now done, the description, the analysis, the interpretation. Maybe come up with a title for this photo that kind of brings all those previous 3 parts together. Maybe come up with a sentence about how you feel about this work. Maybe come up with a reason that the photographer chose this particular angle to take this photo. I keep wondering if the bottle was thrown from the ship. Nice. I wonder the same thing too. I hope not, because these scientists that were on this ship were actually studying all of this. Ship in a bottle. Nice title. I wonder how far from shore. Yes, because there's no land around, is there? The boat represents the humans that threw the, ooh, symbolism. I love it. Nice. Nice job. Okay. Let's move on. I wish I could figure out how to get back to my There we go. So now that I had Plastic Ahoy and Sea Otter Heroes under my belt, combining STEM and language arts was a conscious choice in Zoo Scientists to the Rescue. I also unwittingly added another layer of complexity to this book, logistics. Zoo Scientists to the Rescue is about 3 scientists who work at 3 different zoos and save 3 endangered species. So I have 9 things I'm worrying about. The 3 endangered species I'm dealing with are orangutans, black-footed ferrets, and black rhinos. Annie Crawley worked with me on this book too. We had to figure out when we could both visit the 3 zoos and interview each of the scientists. And we had to figure out when would be the best time to capture fantastic photos. I also had to get the buy-in of 3 zoos to work with us. That was harder than you'd think. Many zoos think of their animals as intellectual property and charge for their scientists' time. One zoo I talked to wanted me to pay a $10,000 upfront fee and then a royalty thereafter for the life of the book. I couldn't afford that, so I couldn't afford to work with this great zoo. Annie and I went to the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. to interview Meredith Bastian, who's pictured here. But we also knew we needed photos of her previous research in Borneo, which Meredith was kind enough to provide. And that's what you're looking at here, Meredith wading through the swamps in Borneo as she's doing her orangutan research. We focus on Meredith's field science because, and how she tracked and observed the orangutans, because that experience now informs and shapes how zoos care for orangutans, how zoos care for captive orangutans. For these adorable black-footed ferrets, we traveled to Denver to meet with the people in charge of black-footed ferret breeding and the boot camp programs, where we were promptly greeted by a Denver blizzard in March. Boy, did that throw our plans into disarray. We holed up in a hotel room, made a lot of phone calls, and finally managed to cobble together a schedule. Luckily, the people involved with black-footed ferrets wanted this book as much as we did. We interviewed Jeff Boffman, the keeper responsible for breeding the males and females, and then caring for the newborn kits before they were sent to boot camp to train them to hunt and ultimately release them into the wild. We talk a lot about reproductive science in this chapter, as well as the many partnerships required to release black-footed ferrets into the wild. You can't just do this willy-nilly. Land is owned by virtually everybody, so you have to work with people that are going to help keep them alive. One advantage to reading my books is that your students learn about different STEM careers. They will see that science is a collaborative affair. No one person has all the answers. And we move ahead in science by working together and sharing information. After Denver, Annie and I traveled to Chicago, and we actually got to stay at her mom's house. The best chapter title ever, right? Feces Save Species. There's that 7th grade brain at work. The weather even cooperated for travel and photos, and we were really glad about that because the scientists we were working with, Rachel Santemeyer, said that rhinos don't come out of their bedrooms if it's too cold. Here's Rachel right here in the photo on the right. She traveled to Africa to study the pressures affecting wild rhinos, and her nickname, Dr. Poop. Turns out feces are a reliable way to find out whether rhinos are stressed, but governments and airlines frown on suitcases filled with thousands of pounds of rhino dung. We spent a lot of time with Rachel in her lab as she showed us how she developed a test to sample a rhino's feces to determine if it was ready to breed or if it was somehow stressed in another way. And we described this science in Zoo Scientists to the Rescue. Instead of poop, Rachel returns with test tubes filled with hormones. I'm going to stop sharing right there. So I still had my notebook idea going. And like I said, I keep using it for every book I write. This book required 2 notebooks. But another lesson I had to learn with Zoo Scientists to the Rescue was focus. And this is a valuable lesson no matter what you're writing, whether you're a science communicator or writing a book, or you're writing an English paper or writing up a science experiment. Focus is key. I can't tell readers everything I know about orangutans, black-footed ferrets, and rhinos. So I had to work according to a focus theme. And the theme that I chose was the way zoos save endangered species. They save them in 3 ways: education, captive breeding and reintroduction, and field study. So orangutans were my education chapter, how the zoo is using Meredith science to educate zoo visitors about palm oil and burning forests and shrinking orangutan habitat. The black-footed ferrets were captive breeding and reintroduction, all in one piece. And the rhinos were field study, where Rachel actually went to the field and used her lab science to help wild rhino park managers. Here's another example of focus. I've written 3 ocean-related books: Plastic Ahoy, Sea Otter Heroes, and Planet Ocean, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes. All 3 books are about the ocean, but they all focus on a different aspect. One of the ways to define a book's focus is through the proposal process, because I have to provide an overview and a chapter outline long before I've finished my research and I've written the book. So I also include themes and narrative threads in that proposal as well. How am I going to tell this story? And here's where the outlining skills that I learned in 6th grade come in very handy. I've always thought it would be a great student writing exercise to read one of my books and then reverse engineer the proposal. As you're working with the ASU curriculum, if you want to do this exercise with your students, let me know, and I will send you my Plastic Ahoy proposal so your students can compare what they came up with versus what I sent to my editor and what sold. What a great idea, right? By the time I started eavesdropping on elephants, I was in the zone. Let me share my screen with you again. There we go. Eavesdropping on Elephants is the story of Cornell University's Elephant Listening Project. Katie Payne is an acoustic scientist who actually discovered that whales sing complex songs to communicate with each other. After she studied whales, though, she turned her attention to elephants, and she teamed up with Andrea Turcalo, who'd been observing forest elephants in Central Africa for more than 20 years. Katie wanted to know if how forest elephants communicate with each other. They might be a species you've never heard of before. They live in the dense forests of Central Africa, and despite their size, are difficult to find and study. My first task was to bring readers to Central Africa, a place they'd probably never been, and to get them excited about a species of elephant they'd probably never heard of. So I used literary devices, something we ask students to use to add richness to their writing all the time. You may be surprised to learn that even nonfiction uses literary devices: alliteration, simile, metaphor, consonants, assonance. I happen to use setting in the first paragraphs of Eavesdropping on Elephants, and I'd like to read them to you. The air vibrates with deep rumbles that thunder like a bass drum in a tropical forest clearing in the Central African Republic. Families of forest elephants flap their ears and smell the ground with their trunks. High-pitched screams and trumpet blasts accompany deep roars. Many overlapping voices, some high, some low, broadcast the news. A male and female have just mated. Grandmothers, aunts, cousins, nephews, nieces, and even complete strangers twirl in circles to show their excitement. Soon other elephant families enter the clearing. They too rumble and roar to play their part in this symphony of sound. The clearing echoes with the overlapping harmonies of simultaneous elephant calls. Do you wonder what they're saying to each other? Initially, Katie and Andrea wanted to determine what, if anything, they could learn by studying elephants using sound without observing them. They used Andrea's knowledge of elephant movements and family structures and matched these with the sounds they recorded around the forest clearing, where the elephants tended to congregate. They also identified a number of elephant sounds, new sounds. As we know, elephants trumpet, but they also roar, rumble, scream, and even awooga, which is a combination rumble-roar sound. Because this book is about the science of sound, I tried to figure out a way to bring readers into the forest to hear the elephants, like the scientists did. I settled on QR codes. Each QR code has a written story. And when the QR code is scanned, students can see the actual video and hear the actual audio just the way the scientists did. Here's an example, Joe. Joe's gonna play for you an elephant video. It's a happy birthday video. I call it the happy birthday video. So I'm gonna stop sharing so Joe can. The crush of elephants on the right is shielding a newborn, minutes old. I think the poor mother is trying to protect it from all the adoration. Elephant babies are big news in the elephant world. You can hear all the rumbling that's going on. Here's the poor thing trying to stand for the very first time. This is our awe moment. Okay, Joe, thanks. About the time Eavesdropping on Elephants released, I was invited to participate on a panel of authors at the International Literacy Association conference. The email that I received said this was my topic for the panel. Like middle schoolers, women throughout history have often been divided into binaries: bully or bullied, allied or oppressor, insider or outsider. Now, you might think I wasn't a very good match for this topic with my nonfiction book about elephants and acoustic science. But here's what I learned after writing Plastic Ahoy and Sea Otters and Zoo Scientists to the Rescue and Eavesdropping on Elephants. The ocean and the endangered species that I write about were definite outsiders, as was I in 5th grade. That was a really bad year for me. I was the target of bullies, and all of a sudden I became an outsider and effectively lost my voice. Even though I had understanding parents and a great 5th grade teacher, there wasn't much they could do for me. Bullying was a storm I had to weather on my own, but weather it I did, and I emerged reasonably confident and moderately strong. So if you think about it, endangered animals are the ultimate outsiders. Elephants are killed for their tusks. Orangutan habit is burned to plant palm oil trees, which kills the orangutans. Palm oil, by the way, is the most common type of vegetable oil in most of our snack foods and our cosmetics. Rhinos are slaughtered for their horns, supposedly for medicinal purposes. Black-footed ferrets were nearly wiped out because of plague and because their sole food source, prairie dogs, were exterminated. And rhinos were hunted for their pelts. Then we have the ocean that has become a giant garbage dump. So if you think about it, all of these things are picked on for the very thing that makes them them, which anyone who's been bullied can probably relate to. Okay, one last share for you here. I'd like to read the last few paragraphs of Eavesdropping on Elephants, which emphasize for readers the importance of listening to each other and to our world. I think that children's voices and what children care about make a huge difference in this world, Katie says, and they must be given a bigger voice. Perhaps your role will take you to the field as a scientist like Katie, Andrea, and Peter. Perhaps you will learn the building blocks of language to help Daniela understand these giants of the forest. Elephants gave me a purpose, Andrea says. It was like a gift being given to me. Perhaps a similar opportunity will change your life. Whatever path you take, remember that listening is the key. What would it be like to hear with an elephant's ears? Listening connects us to the music in our environment and shows us how our habits affect the world around us. The more you listen to wildlife, the more your mind opens up to new ideas about why the world is a place worth saving. Katie says if we learn to listen as well as elephants do, it's possible that listening will keep the world safe. So that brings us to Planet Ocean. I wanted the ocean to be an insider, not a place to dump garbage. Again, Annie and I teamed up, And we knew we didn't want to make this an all about the ocean book. There are lots of those out there. We wanted something different. So we focused on how the ocean story is our story, how we're connected to the sea. We began with how our maps distort the size of our ocean, because as you know, the ocean covers more than 70% of our planet. And I knew this book would be a massive undertaking. So I readied my notebooks. This time I had 4 of them, and they're all filled. Remember, I told you back when I wrote Sea Otter Heroes that I developed this color coding system. Well, here it is. I read my notes after I've interviewed everybody, taken notes on everything. I go back and I read every single page, but I read them with a fistful of highlighters in my hand. And I create a key in the front of every notebook. And each color is associated with a different chapter. So as I read, I might think, oh, this would be great for my opening chapter. I highlighted in orange. Oh, this would be great for my Arctic chapter. I highlighted in yellow. Wow, this would be a powerful message for my last chapter. I highlighted in pink. That way, as I'm writing, all I have to do is flip through and find the colors that I need. We take readers in Planet Ocean to 3 ocean regions that are so different they seem completely unconnected, but they aren't. And here's the magic of Planet Ocean. I've written in my connection to the sea and Annie's connection to the sea, but I've also shown readers how they are connected. When they understand, they care, and when they care, they protect. This is exactly what the ASU curriculum is talking about. Our first stop is the Coral Triangle near Indonesia, where readers explore warming ocean temperatures and changes in the chemistry of seawater and how it affects the people and animals who live there. We visit the Salish Sea in the Pacific Northwest, where ocean acidification affects shellfish and salmon and changes the very essence of the Lummi Nation's cultural heritage, a heritage that relies on salmon. Most people have no idea how we're connected to the Arctic, but we are. Annie and I show the effects of the melting ice in places like Alaska, the Pacific Northwest, and Indonesia, and how the Arctic provides cold water that nourishes all other parts of our ocean. The other thing that we put in this book is QR codes. You can see one on this page. We have about 11 of them in this book, and they all connect to Annie's videos and give readers an underwater perspective, something we don't very often have when we look at the ocean. To help me write Planet Ocean with an underwater perspective, Annie gave me a dive lesson. And to show our connection to the ocean, we shared stories about people who are speaking up. We interviewed artists like a composer and another photographer, Indigenous people, and kids and teens, all trying to spread the word that we're part of the sea, even if we don't live on its shores. And in the last chapter, Annie and I show readers how to draw on their personal experiences and encourage them to use storytelling skills to become a voice for the ocean. Again, there's that blend of science and language arts. Annie and I believe that by learning what others are doing and speaking up, we not only provide hope, but we can somehow control some of that eco-anxiety that so many of us face. So in addition to the ASU curriculum, Plastic Ahoy has inspired a number of student projects. These students in this picture thought about the amount of trash they generated in the classroom. So they recycled, refused, and simply used less. This tiny trash can that one of these girls is holding up is their entire landfill waste for the year. Isn't that inspiring? An 8th grade class that I visited studied Plastic Ahoy. This was an English class, and then became science communicators. They wrote reports about plastic, and they also wrote short, tightly focused blog posts about various aspects of ocean plastic for their school's online newspaper. And then they drafted their own plastic legislation, which they argued at the state capitol during a field trip. And then there's Maddie, my absolute favorite, a student who read Plastic Ahoy in 8th grade and decided she wanted to study plastic in the ocean in college. She wrote her college essay on the effect Plastic Ahoy had on her. Gosh, I get choked up just thinking about it. I love to share these projects. So when you work on your ASU curriculum, Please send pictures, send student work to me so I can brag about you too. Wherever I go, students are ready to help our planet, and they get it. They get the connections. Let me demonstrate with one last anecdote. At a school visit, the librarian asked me to talk briefly about Nama's Reason to Smile because all the kids had read it. And then she said, this was her words, and then she said, segue into Plastic Ahoy. Well, these two books couldn't be more different. Nama is about equal access to education, and Plastic Ahoy, as you know, is about garbage. So I asked the students for help. My first question was, how are these books different? And they said Nama's Reason to Smile is picture book fiction illustrated with drawings about a little girl who wants to go to school. And Plastic Ahoy is middle grade nonfiction illustrated with photos about ocean plastic. So next, I asked them how the books are the same. And a third grader blew my mind. She said they both want us to do something. That's my work wrapped up in a tidy package. I want readers to do something. So as you read Plastic Ahoy and work through ASU's fantastic curriculum, please help your students get that organization under control. I totally get it. I'm with them. I sympathize. They can't help being disorganized. Help students read the photos as well as the text. Find the emotional connection to what they're reading, both my emotional connection and their own connection. Help them develop their language arts skills to become effective science communicators. And above all, motivate them to do. We need them now more than ever. Thanks so much. I'd love to take your questions if you have any. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a question from Mike. I wonder what a writing proposal rubric would include.
Well, you know, writing a proposal deals with several skills that students are learning in middle school. One of them is summarizing. That's what the overview is, a summary of the book. One of them is outlining. That's what the chapter summary is. So I imagine that those are the two main skills that you would be teaching. But I would think that maybe you would also be looking for how, I don't know how to put this in a rubric, but a proposal is a sales document. So it's a persuasive document. So that's kind of what they're making. They're not in full sentences. It's very much notey-like, but you know, are they able to persuade you that this is a project worth undertaking? So I would imagine that those are some of the skills that you would have to include in a rubric. Does that help? Okay, thanks, Michael. Any other questions? I know I fire hosed you with a bunch of stuff. You're probably all wet right now.
I have one about what advice would you give to a teacher that's nervous about bringing nonfiction into their classroom? I know some teachers think it's too difficult, or how would you advise a teacher?
I think, you know, I think teachers often have that perception that nonfiction is too difficult. But if you look at the scientific studies, children actually prefer nonfiction. The younger they are, the more they prefer nonfiction. And I think sometimes, don't get mad at me, but I think sometimes we are the barriers to children in their literature choices. There are several teachers who have recorded, I guess, what their children are checking, what their students are checking out in the library. And you would be surprised how much of it is nonfiction. So I think you're selling your students short if you think nonfiction is too hard. Yes, in Plastic Ahoy, I talk about transects and I talk about photosynthesis and I talk about all these other different science concepts. But the cool thing about them is they are placed in context. It's not just let's learn about photosynthesis. It's let's learn what phytoplankton do to figure out how they help us so we can figure out if our plastic is hurting them. So if you put it in context, all of a sudden, it's not quite so hard anymore. You might have to do a close reading of some of the scientific sections. I worked with some fifth graders recently with Planet Ocean, and we did a very close reading of what exactly is ocean acidification and what that chemical reaction is. And they were able to reproduce in diagrams what's going on in ocean acidification. So don't sell your kids short. They can handle it, especially if they're interested in it and if there's a connection to them. It's the all important connection. Any more questions? I'm here. I'm here for you right now. I'm here. Ahem. I also do school visits. So everybody's on it. Everybody's on top of it. You know, you go to robotics from here.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is the easy part, people.
Oh, I heard someone unmute and then.
Oh, I wonder what technologies we can imagine using to illustrate these concepts. That's a great idea. What do you think? What technologies can you imagine to illustrate some of these concepts? I think ASU has probably done a pretty darn good job to help you out there.
Maybe we can draw with the rover.
Yeah. Thank you for loving Sea Otter Heroes, Laura. I love that book too.
Maybe even use co-spaces to regenerate some of these like oceans and environments too from the books. Just a thought.
That's the great thing about these kinds of curricula that Joe and his team are developing, because, you know, you're not locked in to what they say you should do. You can take it off on the whatever tangent interests you and your students. That's what science is all about, is that inquiry, right? Scratchpad. Oh, there's an idea. Please share your projects with me, please, so I can brag about what you're doing and what ASU did for you.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Laura, I'd like to hear more about what you can imagine doing with Scratchpad.
Oh, hi guys. Good afternoon. I just learned about Scratchpad like a week ago because my kids found it, and they said they were bored in class one day, not my class, but another class, and they used Scratchpad, and they were like showing it to me, and I was like, what? And they're like, yeah, you can like basically draw. I was like, And so I just thought about that, like maybe the kids would, you know, read Plastic Ahoy. Sorry, bells. They would read Plastic Ahoy, and then maybe they could draw about it. So yeah, and with that, I'll pass.
And I
I
don't know,
love that idea.
I was telling Chani and Robin before Joe hopped on, before you all hopped on, and I want to mention this because I see Gabriella there in the audience. This whole partnership developed because Gabriella and I were at a conference. Maybe it was NSTA. I'm not sure. It was NSTA. Okay. And I was driving around the exhibit hall, and Gabriella was in front of a great climate change.
I'm so sorry. So sorry.
Gabriella was in front of a climate change exhibit that ASU had put together, and we got started talking. And she is the one who introduced me to Joe and his team. And she's the very reason that this whole partnership happened. So let's give a shout out to Gabriella.
Thank you, Patricia. And I subscribed to your newsletter. And so when we were discussing just ways to bring literature into the curriculum, I was, Patricia, I remember just having such an excellent conversation with you, and your newsletters are just so informative. And so thank you for being a part of this project with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Well, we are so grateful for all of that knowledge you shared with us, Patricia. It was insightful, inspiring. I loved seeing behind the scenes of the authorship process. And I think as educators, we walk away with a lot of ideas of how we can now take nonfiction writing and incorporate it into our classrooms in so many different ways and empower students to change the world and do something. So thank you so much. And educators, we can't wait for you to engage with Patricia Newman's book, Plastic Ahoy, during our AI and robotics curriculum. If you have any lingering questions for her, you can shoot us emails or contact Patricia, and we'll all be happy to pass those on and field them. Coming up next, in the next couple of minutes, we have our next Sphero rover with microbit and littlebits session. So as you go back to Eventry and navigate over there, we'll see you in the next session. But one more round of applause and thank you to Patricia
Thank you,
for an
everybody.
awesome session.
Have fun in robotics.